Welcome to the Basic Concepts of Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking section. Now, before learning how to perform penetration tests on live systems, let's first learn exactly what the penetration test is and what the basic concepts are, the way that I define them, and the way that I'm going to use them throughout the course. Please, I want to warn you that this section is prepared to teach you the basic concept of penetration testing and ethical hacking. So I strongly recommend watching the lectures of this section. However, if you already know the concept and terminologies of penetration testing, or if you're just impatient and you really want to get right to the hands-on practice, you can go ahead and skip this section. I give you permission. Not that you needed it anyway. In this section, we're going to learn what the penetration test is, and from now on, I'll just abbreviate it to pen test, the types of security tests and audits that we perform to understand the strength of an IT network, security audits, vulnerability assessments, and pen tests, the basic concepts of offensive security, asset, threat, vulnerability, and risk, the pen test approaches from black box to white box. And what about the steps of planning a pen test? What is the purpose of the test? What is the scope of the test? What are the requirements to test the scope and the restrictions of the test? We're also going to learn the main phases of a pen test: reconnaissance, aka information gathering, scanning the network and scanning for the vulnerabilities, exploitation, aka gaining access, and post-exploitation, covering the tracks of the test, and reporting the test results. We're also going to learn the legal issues that you should know about and obey, and the worldwide organizations that determine and publish pen test standards. So, first things first, what is the penetration test? To answer this question, I would like to show you 3 definitions from 3 different resources. Talk about reconnaissance. The first one is from Wikipedia. The definition of penetration test in Wikipedia is as follows, and I quote, "An attack on a computer system with the intention of finding security weaknesses, potentially gaining access to it, its functionality, and data," end quote. Now, I want you to pay attention to the words "with the intention of finding security weaknesses." Second definition is from the CISSP Preparation Guidebook, and I quote, "A pen test can determine how a system reacts to an attack, whether or not a system's defenses can be breached, and what information can be acquired from the system." Now, the words that I want to emphasize here are how a system reacts to an attack. And the last definition is from another book. It's called Penetration Testing, Protecting Networks and Systems. And I quote, "Pen testing is the simulation of an attack on a system, network, piece of equipment, or other facility, with the objective of proving how vulnerable that system or target would be to a real attack," end quote. I want you to notice the words here, the simulation of an attack. So my take on this, since you're asking, is basically bringing a few of these selected parts of the previous definitions together. So my definition: a penetration test or pen test is the attack simulation on IT systems with the intention of finding security weaknesses to determine how systems react to these weaknesses. See what I mean? Now, in a cybersecurity point of view, we can classify the cybersecurity tests and audits into 3 parts. A security audit typically checklists of best practices, of course, in terms of cybersecurity, vulnerability assessment, identifying the security holes, and penetration tests, the main subject of this course. Now, a computer security audit is a manual or systematic, measurable technical assessment of a system or application. Security audit assessments include performing security vulnerability scans for best practices, interviewing staff to understand the level of information security awareness, reviewing the access controls of the applications and operating systems, and analyzing the physical access to the systems. An important point to take into consideration is, in order to be able to get the most accurate results, we should perform the security audits with admin privileges. Now, perhaps the major question is, where can we find the best practices to perform security audits? Good question. Thankfully, there are some organizations and consortiums which regularly publish and update the security audit checklists of IT systems. And these are the most popular organizations to collect checklists from. The Center of Internet Security is a nonprofit organization formed in October of 2000. Its mission is to, quote, identify, develop, validate, promote, and sustain best practice solutions for cyber defense, and build and lead communities to enable an environment of trust in cyberspace, end quote. Now, they call checklists benchmarks, but benchmarks are not the only thing that they're known for. In fact, if you're administering IT systems, CIsecurity.org should be one of your home pages. Bookmark it right now. I'll wait for you. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a physical sciences laboratory as well as a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. Its mission is to promote innovation and industrial competitiveness. If you visit their website, shown in the slide here, you'll find the National Checklist Program repository of their National Vulnerability Database program. They have a wide range of up-to-date checklists. To help system admins automatize the audits, a couple of checklist formats have been created by these organizations. If you can create your own programs or scripts according to these standards, you'll be able to use a massive number of checklists to audit your systems. I'll let you know what some of the best-known checklist standards are. XCCDF. The XCCDF acronym stands for Extensible Configuration Checklist Description Format. However, as the name suggests, the language is used to describe the security checklists. The language is designed to support information interchange, document generation, organizational and situational tailoring, automated compliance testing, and compliance scoring. OVAL. The OVAL acronym stands for Open Vulnerability and Assessment Language. OVAL is declarative language for making logical assertions about the state of a system. Its main component is the SCAP standard. It's used to describe security vulnerabilities or desired configuration of systems. OVAL definitions define a secure state of some of the objects in a computer. For example, configuration files, file permissions, processes. OVAL definitions are evaluated using an interpreter called Scanner. You can, of course, create your own tool to automate your audits or use the tools created before. Cybersecurity has a tool. It's called SysCat, Cybersecurity Configuration Assessment Tool, which automates benchmarking of a number of operating systems. Vulnerability assessment is a process of defining, identifying, and classifying the security holes in IT systems. An attacker can exploit a vulnerability, the name of a particular security hole, to violate the security of a system. Now, some known vulnerability types are authentication, authorization, and input validation vulnerabilities. And the main difference between the vulnerability assessment and the penetration test is that you do not go beyond finding the vulnerabilities in a vulnerability assessment process. You don't try to gain access or maintain the access you gained and all that. So you won't be sure whether or not the finding really exists or, very important, if it's a false positive. Now, you may find some explanations where vulnerability scanning and vulnerability assessment are used for the same reason. However, as you know now, vulnerability assessment is a process that covers the vulnerability scanning. A vulnerability assessment basically consists of the following steps: identify assets and build an asset inventory. Do you know what the asset is? No worries. Just wait for the next slide. Be patient, my young apprentice. Categorize assets into groups. Scan assets for known vulnerabilities. Rank the risks. Manage the remediation process. And perform follow-up remediation scans to be sure that they're gone. There are tons of systems and services in an IT network. You should scan all the hosts and services of your IT system. Manual scan is, almost impossible in practice. So thankfully, we have vulnerability scanners or vulnerability assessment tools, which help you to follow the other steps of the assessment. Qualys, Nessus, and Nexpose are three of the most popular vulnerability scanners. These are commercial tools. Although they have a free community edition, you will have to pay to use all of the functionalities of the tools. OpenVAS, Open Vulnerability Assessment System, is a free and open source tool supported by a pretty good community. So throughout the course, we're going to be using some particular terminology quite often. So it's better if we just define them up front. And then that way, if you get to know them now, you won't be running the glossary every time you come across it. So here we have the asset: people, property, and information. People may include the employees or the customers, along with other invited persons, such as contractors or guests. Property assets consist of both tangible and intangible items that can be assigned a value. Intangible assets include reputation as well as proprietary information. The information itself may include databases, software codes, critical company records, and many other intangible items. In short, an asset is what we are trying to protect. Threat: anything that can exploit a vulnerability, intentionally or accidentally, and obtain, damage, or destroy an asset. In other words, a threat is what we're trying to protect against. Vulnerability: weaknesses or gaps in a security program that can be exploited by threats to gain unauthorized access to an asset. A vulnerability is a weakness or gap in our protection efforts. Risk: the potential for loss, damage, or destruction of an asset as a result of a threat exploiting a vulnerability. Risk is the intersection of assets, threats, and vulnerabilities. So why is it so important to understand the difference between these terms? In my opinion, if you don't understand that difference very specifically, you'll never understand the true risk to the assets at stake. You see, when conducting a risk assessment, the formula used to determine risk is A plus T plus V equals R. That is, asset plus threat plus vulnerability equals risk. Exploit. Literally, it should be defined as a piece of software or a sequence of commands that takes advantage of a vulnerability to cause unintended or unanticipated behavior to occur on computer software or hardware. But I'd like to take a moment to explain it in these words. An exploit is an attack on a computer system, especially one that takes advantage of a particular vulnerability the system has or is known for. Used as a verb, exploit refers to the act of successfully making such an attack. Now, one of the basic questions of a penetration test is, what should a pen tester, I think you understand the word by now, the person who performs the pen test, what should the pen tester know about the system that he or she will test? There are typically different approaches according to the knowledge that the pen testers have. A black box pen test requires no previous information and usually takes the approach of an uninformed attacker. In a black box pen test, the pen tester has no previous information about the target system. White box testing is a pen testing approach that uses the knowledge of the internals of the target system to elaborate the test cases. For example, in application pen testing, the source code of the application is usually provided along with design information. Or in an infrastructure pen test, network maps, infrastructure details, etc. are provided. The goal of a white box pen test is to provide as much information as possible to the pen tester so that he or she can gain insight, understanding of the system, and elaborate the test based on that. Of course, each approach has some advantages as well as some disadvantages, so let's have a look at that now. The advantage of a black box pen test is that it simulates a very realistic scenario. And these are the disadvantages of the black box pen test. Testing time cannot be maximized in certain scenarios. Some areas of the infrastructure might remain untested. The advantages of a white box pen test are you can perform a deep and thorough test. It maximizes the testing time, so you don't need to spend time to find out the system information. It extends the testing area where black box testing cannot reach, such as the quality of code, application design, etc. Now, some people might think that the white box approach is not realistic, as the pen tester is, just not in the same position as a non-informed potential attacker. Don't agree with this, though, because there might be some inside attackers, or a hacker might have access on an insider's computer, and he or she can potentially learn all the information of the system. Got it? So these are the steps you should take while planning a pen test. We'll see them here in detail. The first step of planning a pen test is to identify the needs of the customer. Here I use the word customer as the owner of the IT system that you perform a pen test for. Of course, the customer's basic need is to identify weaknesses in the information system and take measures before a real attack occurs. But here we should find the methods and targets according to the customer's sensitive topics. For example, who is the most important threat for the customer? An insider, an employee of that company, or an outsider? What is the most important asset that the customer wants to protect? A customer database, financial records, etc., etc. From physical security to web applications, there are a lot of different topics and infrastructures that may be subject to the pen test. There are a few factors to decide the scope of the pen test. The first factor, of course, is asset groups of the customer. And by that I mean you cannot test the wireless systems if the customer doesn't have a wireless network, right? But generally speaking, of course, the customer will decide the scope, but please remember, in most cases, you should guide them to decide the correct scope. You should prepare everything you'll need in the pen test. In addition, you should inform the company to be prepared for the pen test as well. On the pen tester side, you'll need the attacker systems such as laptop, external disks, USB sticks, etc. And you should be sure that all the necessary applications are installed on these systems. As another important part of preparation, do not forget to install and update the software tools that you'll be using. Just double check. On the other hand, advise the owner of the IT system to have the following setups before the pen test. Monitoring solution. To detect the attacks is as important as to prevent them. In addition, monitoring will let them know what you do throughout the pen test. Since all the pen tests have some risks, it would be better that the owner of the IT system have an up-to-date backup so that they can prevent any possible data loss. And lastly, you should be ready for a service interruption during the pen test, so help the system owner to prepare an emergency response plan. Now, of course, we cannot perform everything we want during the test. Since we are under the rules of an agreement, we do have some restrictions. But please don't forget that the actions we perform in a pen test are totally illegal unless we have an agreement with the legal system owner, right? So these restrictions are mostly defined in the rules of engagement and, of course, in the non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement, NDA, is a legal contract between the pen tester and the system owner that outlines confidential information that the parties wish to restrict access to or by third parties. You will probably access the most critical and confidential data of the system owner, so this agreement is very important, especially for the system owner. Rules of engagement will decide the limits of the pen test. It basically decides the scope, total test duration, the times that the attacks will be performed, and the methods to be used. For example, you should identify whether the DDoS, the denial of service attacks, will be performed as part of a pen test. If it will be performed, the owner is probably going to ask you to perform the attack probably at midnight of a particular weekend. A penetration test briefly consists of 5 phases. Reconnaissance. Now that's the act of gathering preliminary data or intelligence on your target. The data is gathered in order to better plan for your attack. The phase of scanning requires the application of technical tools to gather further intelligence on your target. But in this case, the intel being sought is more commonly about the systems that they have in place. A good example would be the use of a vulnerability scanner on a target network. Exploitation. That's the phase that's also known as gaining access. It requires taking control of one or more network devices in order to either extract data from the target or to use that device to then launch attacks on other targets. The purpose of the post-exploitation phase is to determine the value of the machine compromised and to maintain control of the machine for later use. The value of the machine is determined by the sensitivity of the data stored on it and the machine's usefulness in further compromising the network. Now, covering tracks simply means that the attacker must take steps necessary to remove all semblance of detection. Any changes that were made, authorizations that were escalated, etc., all must return to a state of non-recognition by the host network's administrators. Reporting is the proof of your actions performed during the pen test. It's where you're going to report the findings and share recommendations to remediate the vulnerabilities and weaknesses. So let's have a look at these phases in detail. Reconnaissance. As you already know, it's the act of gathering preliminary data or intelligence on your target. The data is gathered in order to better plan for your attack. The success of the pen test depends on the accuracy of your reconnaissance. A pen tester works on gathering as much intelligence on the client organization and the potential targets for exploit as possible. We can classify the scanning activities into two main parts. Network scan is used to discover devices such as end-user computers, servers, and peripherals that exist on a network. Results can include details of the discovered devices, including IP addresses, device names, operating systems, running applications and services, open shares, usernames, and groups. Since we gather information about the network and system, this process is often related to the reconnaissance phase as well. A vulnerability scan detects and classifies system weaknesses in computers, networks, and communications equipment, and predicts the effectiveness of countermeasures. Now, since there are thousands of different systems and services, we should perform thousands of analyses to understand whether or not a service has vulnerabilities. And the vulnerability scanners are used to automate this process. Makes your job a whole lot easier. Exploitation. That's the phase that requires taking control of one or more network devices in order to either extract data from the target or to use that device to then launch attacks on other targets. The purpose of the post-exploitation phase is to determine the value of the machine compromised and to maintain control of the machine for later use. The value of the machine is determined by the sensitivity of the data stored on it and the machine's usefulness in further compromising the network. Now I've got your attention. The final phase before reporting is covering your tracks. It's basically returning everything to the initial state, the state before the pen test. Now, since you have limited time to perform the pen test, you might ask the system owner to define some privileges and exceptions for you. If so, you should remind them to remove these exceptions at the end of the pen test. And in addition, you will probably make a lot of changes during the pen test, such as adding a new user to the domain admin group or create a backdoor into a compromised system for later use. It's very important to remove all these changes at the end of the pen test. Otherwise, the black hat hackers can compromise the systems using these modifications. The report is the fruit of the pen test. It's the outcome of the actions you performed throughout the pen test. A pen test report typically consists of the following sections. An introduction. What's the purpose, the scope, and the duration of the test? A management summary. The screenshot of the IT system to show how vulnerable it is. The findings section that lists all of the vulnerabilities found during the pen test. And the recommendation section includes just how the owner can harden the system. Now, it's obvious that the findings is going to be the most important section of the pen test report, especially to the owner. The system owner will see the weaknesses here and remediate them according to your recommendations. So you should give at least the following details about the findings. A short name of the vulnerability to give brief information about it. The severity level of the vulnerability. That'll help the system owner to triage the remediation process. The list of vulnerable assets. Which assets in particular have this vulnerability? A detailed explanation of the vulnerability to show the possible consequences. A brief summary of how you identified the vulnerability. And support this section with screenshots wherever possible. Recommendations to remediate or at least mitigate the vulnerability. And finally, Share the references about the vulnerability to let the system owner find out more about it. Before beginning a pen test, the parties should enter into a contract indicating exactly what the pen testers will do and will not do, and the range of IP addresses, subnets, computers, networks, or devices that will be the subject of the pen test. The pen tester should obtain a get-out-of-jail-free card from the customer, specifically indicating not only that the pen testing is authorized, but also indicating that the customer has the legal authority to authorize the pen test. Big distinction, and very important. If a cloud customer authorizes a pen tester to test their network in the cloud, this does not mean that the cloud provider has authorized the test. The cloud provider could go after the pen tester for unauthorized access. A non-disclosure agreement, NDA. It's also known as a confidentiality agreement. It's a legal contract between the pen tester and the system owner that outlines confidential material, knowledge, or information that the parties wish to share with one another for certain purposes, but wish to restrict access to or by third parties. As I mentioned before, you will probably access the most critical and confidential data of the system owner. So this agreement is very important, especially for the system owner. Now, since penetration tests are very important for cybersecurity, it'd be very good to have some standards while performing the test steps. And thankfully, we have several organizations and consortiums to identify the standards. The best-known ones are PCI DSS. It's the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. PCI DSS is the worldwide payment card industry data security standard that was set up to help businesses process card payments securely and reduce card fraud. Sad but true fact here that money seems to be the most important thing for human beings, so these guys identify the standards of cybersecurity. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It's a worldwide, not-for-profit charitable organization focused on improving the security of software. So you can find standards of application security right here. PTES, Penetration Testing Execution Standard, was started as the brainchild of 6 information security consultants attempting to address deficiencies in the penetration testing community in 2009. PTES helps penetration testers adhere to best practices, so check them out. OSSTMM, Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual, is methodology to test the operational security of physical locations, workflow, human security testing, physical security testing, wireless security testing, telecommunications security testing, data network security testing, and compliance. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a physical sciences laboratory and a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. Its mission is to promote innovation and industrial competitiveness. They're very good at defining standards, though. SP 800-115 is a technical guide to information security testing and assessment. The purpose of this document is to assist organizations in planning and conducting technical information security tests and examinations, analyzing findings, and developing mitigation strategies.